Hello film fans and welcome to this episode of the Sherlockian. Now, it's no secret on this channel that I'm a massive fan of dinosaur documentaries, particularly dinosaur documentaries that like to get very creative in how they reconstruct how dinosaurs might have lived. Now, I've reviewed a few shows like Monsters Resurrected and Truth About Killer Dinosaurs, which like to try and use modern machines and recreations to try and show the kind of make dinosaurs come alive in the present day. So, for example, Monsters Resurrected would use things like a gigantic claw to try and show how a Spinosaurus's claw might have worked, and in The Truth About Killer Dinosaurs, they recreated the head of a T-Rex to give some idea of this kind of power a T-Rex's jaws might have been able to produce. Now, I was just having a quick look through BBC iPlayer, and I came across a show that I'd been vaguely aware of, but I hadn't really ever watched before, and that's Steve Backshall's Deadly Dinosaurs. Now, I reviewed Deadly 60 on this channel before, and basically Deadly Dinosaurs is kind of the dinosaur equivalent of that show. Basically, naturalist Steve Backshall looks at dinosaurs and he basically recreates their attributes using modern technology and looks at, what made them particularly deadly. Now, this sounds like a very kind of Monsters Resurrected kind of pretext of a show, doesn't it? It sounds like the very kind of red in tooth and claw kind of documentary showing how deadly dinosaurs are and how they go around chomping things. But actually, the show is very good, and just like Deadly 60, it takes the time to look at sort of more smaller dinosaurs that sometimes get overlooked, as well as the big impressive ones like T-Rex. Now, what I particularly enjoy about this show is, one, it is very clearly aimed at children, so it's very enthusiastic. And also, I like the idea of all these bizarre and wacky experiments they do in order to show different stuff. Now, they do the obvious ones, like they show how powerful an Ankylosaurus tail is by using a kind of, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's like one of those long bars on kind of an axle, and it swings around and smacks into stuff. And it's a very similar kind of experiment that they did in The Truth About Killer Dinosaurs to recreate a similar kind of thing. Only it's clearly they didn't have quite the same kind of budget as that other show. But other experiments they do are actually quite creative. So, for example, I particularly enjoyed the one where they are looking at ichthyosaurs. And Steve Backshall wears these like jet boots, which are attached to, I imagine, a fire engine somewhere off screen. And basically, he's in this kind of like a gravel pit with this very deep kind of lake at the bottom, and he's swimming through the water and leaping out of it, doing those kind of penguin leaps that you often see on documentaries with like things like seals and dolphins and penguins, where they kind of porpoise through the water. And it's absolutely brilliant watching this. And he's clearly enjoying himself far too much for someone who's at work. I particularly like the bit where he really rises up and then like dives down really, really gradually in this wonderful kind of soaring arc. And all you can hear is him just yelling at the top of his voice while he's doing it. It's absolutely fantastic. And it does show, to be fair, how an ichthyosaur probably moved through the water, albeit, in a very kind of fun, hands-on way. They do other kind of experiments as well. So, for example, I like the one where they illustrate how powerful a Pachycephalosaurus's headbutt would have been, using these kind of two like massive like metal sledgehammers, again on a kind of axle, and they come down and go smack into each other. And so basically they smash different things with it to show exactly how powerful the force of the headbutt actually was. And it really does bring home to you the kind of forces that these dinosaurs would have actually been creating with their heads. It's absolutely incredible. First of all, they test it on a tin of paint, which is clearly just for an effect. I mean, although to be fair, the way it flattens the paint tin, and what's quite interesting is that the two, the hammers don't quite meet in the middle, so one of them connects with it just before the other. And what's amazing is the side of the paint can completely flattens just from the force of one of them, and then when the other one connects and they get squashed, the paint can just explodes. And it's almost the metal is not quite atomized, obviously, but it's shattered, and it is quite impressive. They then test it on a crash helmet, which again just shatters completely, which again is very, very impressive. And then they test it on a metal safe, which is not quite so spectacular, but when you actually look at the way it twists the metal and you think that kind of force was generated by an animal's head, and you see the way it just twists through the iron, which the safe is made of, it really is quite impressive. You sort of think, wow, imagine if one had actually headbutted a person, it would just, shattered their entire chest cavity. You wouldn't have stood a chance. It was quite extraordinary, the kind of forces these animals were creating. They also, as I said, do get quite creative. So some of the things they do are quite obvious. So, for example, them to show Hapsigopteryx in flight, Steve Backshall flies up in a helicopter and he watches a Spitfire fly past, and he then talks about Hapsigopteryx. Apparently, they were roughly the same kind of size as a Spitfire, and they have some nice CGI, which actually shows the Hapsigopteryx flying next to the Spitfire. But it's clearly done for effect. It's quite a kind of basic kind of analogy, if you like. But when they're looking at the big predatory dinosaurs, there's a lovely bit that I think was filmed probably on Salisbury Plain. Now, if you don't know what Salisbury Plain is, basically it's a massive expanse of countryside in Wiltshire, I think it is, hence the name Salisbury Plain. And it's a lot of it's actually used as military testing sites for their big kind of military vehicles. And they basically they use the military vehicles to kind of as sort of stand-ins for these big predatory dinosaurs. So they use I think it's a Panther like armored car. It looks a bit like an armored Land Rover, to be honest, as like a stand-in for Allosaurus. Then they use a Challenger 2 tank for T-Rex, and then they use I can't quite remember what the name is. It begins with a K, I think. But basically, it's a big armored tractor. Or armored bulldozer is probably a better description, for Spinosaurus, and it's quite fascinating how Steve Backshall talks about them while they're manoeuvring around him. I particularly like the bit when the Challenger 2 comes on the scene, and he says, when dinosaurs always roar in films, the sound of the Challenger actually sounds quite like a dinosaur, which, to be fair, it does a bit. And he said it just gave him the chills, as it came in. And the one thing I do really appreciate is that Steve Backshall's so enthusiastic all the time in this show. And to be fair, I also like the fact that there's quite a lot of humour in this show. He wasn't entirely taking his role seriously, which is great, because a lot of those dinosaur reconstruction shows, they're kind of best guess scenarios. We don't really know how most of these dinosaurs interacted with their environment, and as new information comes on board, obviously you would have to change your experiments in accord with this. So I like the idea that actually that you get the sense from watching it that he basically is admitting that actually what a lot of the show is probably, on the slightly fictional side of things, but that they just want to see dinosaurs smash stuff, which is absolutely fine. I think there's a place for that in dinosaur documentaries, to have a lot of fun with it. And one thing I do quite like is that it reuses a lot of old BBC footage. So, for example, it has footage from Planet Dinosaur, from Walking with Dinosaurs, and from The Truth About Killer Dinosaurs, which I quite like. They don't use a lot of it. It's just, almost as inserts in between the experiments. But it's quite nice to revisit those old shows, and you think, oh yeah, I've seen that before somewhere. It doesn't feel like they're kind of fobbing you off in the same way that shows like Monsters Resurrected, they reuse the same footage over and over again with the CGI because they're on a tight budget. With this, it actually makes good use of old CGI, but you don't feel like you're being cheated. It feels like, almost like a nostalgia show with lots of fun experiments thrown in. So yeah, that was my very quick review of Deadly Dinosaurs. I think it's an absolute blast to watch. As it's a BBC show, it's quite possible that any of my American viewers haven't actually seen this show, so it's well worth a watch. It's brilliant. It's actually quite a fun companion piece to shows like Planet Dinosaur, which are far more serious interpretations of dinosaur science and paleontology. This is kind of like the child's version of that show. It's about, having fun, smashing stuff, but also learning some interesting facts along the way. So yeah, that was my review of Deadly Dinosaurs. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, you're very welcome. There's obviously the link in the description below. There's also a link to my Twitter profile if you're interested in following me on there. And also, if you would like to see my review of Planet Dinosaur and Walking with Dinosaurs as well as my review of Deadly 60. I'll stick some links in the description so you can find them easily. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.